Welcome back to the LearnXYZ channel.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Today we're going deep.
Diving deep.
Diving deep. Yeah, I did some pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah.
The intersection of human emotions and vulnerability
Okay.
and how those things impact the decisions we make.
Right.
And it's interesting because we often treat these as like separate topics, but the articles that you've pulled from LearnXYZ in human emotions and the vulnerable man, professional thoughts on prioritization of workload and the ripple effect of decisions suggest they're deeply intertwined.
Yeah.
It's a bit unnerving when you think about it.
Yeah, I think what's fascinating and a little bit unsettling is how societal expectations around vulnerability, particularly for men, can have a ripple effect.
Right.
Not just on their own well-being, but on, team dynamics and the effectiveness of decisions made in organizations.
So we're not just talking about individual feelings here, but how those feelings or the suppression of them can impact everything from project outcomes to potentially like the entire workplace culture.
Precisely. And to really understand this,
Yeah.
I think we need to start by dissecting the concept of vulnerability itself.
Okay.
It's a word that carries a lot of baggage,
Sure.
often perceived as a weakness, especially for men.
Yeah.
And this perception has deep historical and cultural roots. You know what I mean?
It's true. How many times have we heard the phrases like, boys don't cry or man up?
Exactly.
Those messages are so ingrained in our society.
Exactly. And the article, Human Emotions and the Vulnerable Man, points out how these expectations of stoicism can be traced back centuries.
Wow.
You see it with the ancient Greek warriors, where figures like Achilles were celebrated for their emotional control in the face of battle.
Yeah.
And then the Industrial Revolution kind of further reinforced this idea, with men being defined by their roles as providers, requiring them to be emotionally detached to focus on productivity.
Yeah.
It's almost as if emotional suppression became a survival mechanism.
So we've inherited this legacy where men are almost conditioned to suppress their emotions.
Exactly.
But that can't be healthy, right? What's the cost of all this bottled up emotion?
Well, the cost is significant, and it's something we need to be talking about.
Right.
More openly, research shows a direct link between emotional suppression and a host of mental health issues.
Okay.
For men, anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and even higher suicide rates.
It's alarming when you put it like that.
It is.
So by teaching men to bury their feelings, we're essentially denying them healthy coping mechanisms for stress, for processing difficult experiences, and ultimately for building genuine connections with others. No wonder there's a crisis.
It's a crisis we can't afford to ignore, and what's hopeful is that we're starting to see a shift in how vulnerability is portrayed, especially in media. The Human Emotions article highlights this using examples like Ted Lasso.
Okay.
It's not that Ted is weak or overly emotional.
Right.
He's strong and decisive, but he also openly expresses his feelings and encourages others to do the same.
Okay.
It's a powerful example of healthy masculinity.
I see what you mean. It's like those portrayals are giving permission, especially to younger generations, to embrace a fuller range of emotions.
Exactly.
That it's okay to be both strong and vulnerable.
Exactly. And that kind of representation can be incredibly impactful in shifting cultural norms.
Sure.
But let's move beyond the individual level and connect this back to the workplace.
Okay.
How does this play out in teams and organizations where decisions are constantly being made? That's where the other two articles, Professional Thoughts on Prioritization of Workload and the Ripple Effect of Decisions, offer some unsettling insights.
I was just thinking about that. If suppressing emotions is so ingrained in men, how does that manifest in a professional setting?
Right.
Especially when it comes to decision making, because you can't just shut off your feelings at work.
You absolutely can't. And that's where the danger lies.
Okay.
When we're afraid to show vulnerability, we're less likely to ask for help, admit mistakes, or challenge the status quo, even when it's necessary. It's like we're operating from a place of fear rather than a place of authenticity and collaboration.
So even with all the best intentions, if we're not emotionally equipped to handle the complexities of decision-making, things can fall apart pretty quickly.
That's the crux of it. And the article, The Ripple Effect of Decisions, really drives this point home with some powerful and, frankly, disturbing examples.
Okay.
You've got the project manager who makes a last-minute scope change without consulting the team.
Oh, wow.
The team leader who mandates overtime without considering individual circumstances or resources suddenly being reallocated with no clear communication.
You're painting a pretty bleak picture here.
I wish it weren't the case.
Right.
But these scenarios are all too common, and they all stem from this lack of empathy, this inability to truly consider the human impact of decisions.
Okay, but what's the antidote? How do we move away from these fear-based decisions and create a workplace where people feel safe, heard, and empowered?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's something we'll delve into as we continue our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll explore specific strategies for cultivating emotional intelligence.
All right.
Fostering open communication and navigating the complex emotional landscape of decision-making.
It sounds like we've got a lot more to unpack.
Yeah.
This is heavy stuff, but incredibly important. I'm eager to hear more about these strategies.
Let's dive back in.
All right. So we've established that suppressing emotions, particularly for men, can have serious consequences, both for the individuals and for the teams and organizations they're a part of. But where do we go from here?
Right.
How do we actually start to dismantle these deeply ingrained societal expectations around vulnerability?
Right.
It feels like we're talking about a massive cultural shift.
It is a significant undertaking. There's no denying that.
Yeah.
But like any large-scale change, it starts with smaller, more manageable steps.
Okay, so give me an example. What's one tangible thing we can start doing differently?
Well, the human emotions in the Vulnerable Man article makes a strong case for early education.
Okay.
We need to be teaching boys from a young age that it's okay to have feelings, to express them in healthy ways, and to seek support when they need it.
Yeah.
It's about giving them the emotional vocabulary and tools that so many men have been denied.
I love that idea. It's like we need to equip the next generation with the emotional intelligence that's been missing for so long. And it's not just about what we teach them, but what we model for them, right?
Absolutely. Parents, caregivers, educators, we all play a vital role in creating environments where boys feel safe to express their emotions without shame or judgment.
Yeah.
It's about challenging those harmful toughen up messages
Right.
and replacing them with encouragement to be authentic,
Okay. Yeah.
to connect with their feelings, and to build genuine relationships.
But hold on. Isn't there a balance here?
Sure.
I mean, some level of emotional control is necessary.
Of course.
Especially in a professional setting.
Yeah.
Where do we draw the line between healthy expression and, let's say, letting your emotions run wild?
That's a great question, and you've hit on a key point.
Okay.
It's not about eliminating emotions altogether, but rather about developing the self-awareness to understand and manage them effectively. That's really what emotional intelligence is all about.
So you're saying that emotional intelligence is a skill.
Something we can actually develop and improve upon. Absolutely. Think of it like a muscle you can train.
Okay.
It involves things like recognizing your own emotions and how they impact your behavior. Being able to empathize with others.
Okay.
And finding constructive ways to communicate your feelings.
Okay.
And the more we cultivate these skills in ourselves, the better equipped we'll be to model them for the next generation.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this ties back to decision-making. Especially in the workplace. If we're more comfortable with our own vulnerability, we're probably better able to consider the needs and feelings of others when making choices that affect them.
Exactly. And the professional thoughts on prioritization of workload and the ripple effect of decisions articles really emphasize how crucial emotional intelligence is for effective decision-making. When we're self-aware, when we can manage our emotions and empathize with others, we're less likely to make impulsive or fear-based decisions that negatively impact our teams.
That makes sense, but it also seems daunting if someone hasn't developed these skills. Where do they even begin?
Well, one simple but powerful starting point is to pay attention to your body. Notice how your body feels when you're experiencing different emotions. Stress, anger, sadness, joy?
Right.
Do you feel tension in your shoulders? A tightness in your chest?
Interesting.
Becoming aware of these physical sensations can help you identify and label your emotions.
So it's about tuning in to those physical cues.
Exactly.
And recognizing them as signals
Yes.
that something is going on emotionally.
Precisely. And once you start to recognize those signals, you can begin to explore what's triggering them.
Right.
Is it a specific person? A particular task? A deadline looming? Understanding the root cause can help you find healthier ways to cope.
So let's say you're feeling overwhelmed at work.
Right.
And you notice that tension in your shoulders you were just talking about.
Yeah.
What's a practical step you can take in that moment to manage that feeling? Because let's be real, you can't always just walk out of a meeting or take a personal day every time you feel stressed.
You're absolutely right.
Right.
And that's where having a toolbox of coping mechanisms comes in handy. It could be as simple as taking a few deep breaths, going for a short walk, or practicing a quick mindfulness exercise.
Sure.
The key is to find what works for you.
Right.
And to make it a regular practice.
And if it's something bigger than just a fleeting moment of stress.
Right.
If it's a situation where you feel like your voice isn't being heard. Or you're not being treated fairly.
Yeah.
How do you advocate for yourself in a way that's assertive but not aggressive? Because that's where I think a lot of people, especially men, struggle.
You've hit on another crucial point.
Yeah.
And this is where the concept of vulnerability becomes so powerful.
Right.
It's about having the courage to speak up, to share your perspective, even when it feels risky.
Yeah.
And it's about doing so in a way that's respectful, authentic, and focused on finding a solution.
But how do you do that without feeling like you're being weak?
Sure.
Or complaining? Because I think that's a big fear for a lot of people.
It starts with framing your concerns in a way that's constructive and solution-oriented. Instead of saying, you always do this, or this is unfair, try focusing on the impact of the behavior or situation. For example, you could say, when this happens, I feel like my contributions aren't being valued, or I'm concerned that this approach might lead to delays in the project.
So it's about shifting the focus from blame to impact. And proposing a path forward.
Exactly. And remember, vulnerability isn't about oversharing or dumping your emotions on others. It's about being selective and strategic in what you share and with whom you share it.
This is really resonating with me.
Good.
But I can't help but think back to those examples from the ripple effect of decisions.
Yeah.
Those situations where leaders made choices that clearly had a negative impact on their teams. Do you think those leaders lacked emotional intelligence?
That's a complex question.
Yeah.
In some cases, it might have been a lack of awareness, an inability to recognize the emotional needs of their team members. But in other cases, it could be something more deliberate, a prioritization of short-term gains over long-term well-being, a fear of appearing weak, or a belief that emotions have no place in the workplace.
It's like we're up against not just individual shortcomings, but a whole system that perpetuates these harmful behaviors.
All right, it's a systemic issue. And that's why it's so important to address this at multiple levels. Individual, team, and organizational. We need to equip individuals with the skills to manage their emotions and communicate effectively. We need to create team cultures that value vulnerability and psychological safety. And we need to challenge organizational norms and systems that perpetuate these harmful patterns.
So what are some concrete strategies we can implement at the team and organizational levels? Because it feels like changing individual behavior is only one piece of the puzzle.
Yes.
We need to address the environment as well.
Absolutely. And that's where things like promoting open communication, fostering a culture of feedback, and encouraging collaborative decision-making come into play. But that's a whole other conversation, and one we can dive into in more detail in our next segment.
Okay, this is getting really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm eager to hear more about these team and organizational strategies. Let's take a quick pause and come back to this. Okay, we're back. And I'm ready to dive into these team and organizational strategies you mentioned. We've talked a lot about individual responsibility, developing emotional intelligence, learning to embrace vulnerability. But it sounds like that's only one part of the equation.
Yeah.
What about the systems and structures that either support or hinder these efforts?
You're absolutely right. It's like trying to learn a new language, but being surrounded by people who only speak the old one. You might pick up a few phrases, but true fluency requires immersion in an environment that supports your growth. The same applies to cultivating vulnerability and emotional intelligence in the workplace.
So how do we create that kind of environment? What are some concrete steps that teams and organizations can take to foster a culture where these skills can flourish?
One of the most important and often overlooked steps is promoting open and honest communication. And I don't just mean surface-level chit-chat, but creating spaces where people feel safe to share their perspectives, their concerns, and even their doubts without fear of judgment or reprisal.
That sounds ideal, but in reality, a lot of workplaces are still pretty hierarchical. People are afraid to speak up, especially if it means disagreeing with their boss or challenging the status quo.
You're right. That fear is very real, and it's rooted in a culture where vulnerability is often seen as a weakness. So part of the solution is shifting that perception, demonstrating that vulnerability is actually a strength, a sign of self-awareness and courage.
But how do you actually do that? It's one thing to say vulnerability is good. But it's another to create a culture where people genuinely feel safe. To be open and honest.
It requires a multifaceted approach. It starts with leadership modeling the behavior they want to see. If leaders are willing to admit their own mistakes, ask for help when they need it, and be transparent about their decision-making process, it sends a powerful signal to the rest of the team.
So leading by example is key, but it can't just be a top-down thing, right? There needs to be a system in place to encourage this kind of open communication.
Absolutely.
Throughout the organization.
One effective way to do this is by implementing regular feedback mechanisms. And I'm not talking about the dreaded annual performance review, but ongoing informal opportunities for people to share feedback with each other, both positive and constructive.
So creating a culture of feedback where it's not seen as a personal attack. But as an opportunity for growth.
And this can take many forms. It could be as simple as setting aside time in team meetings for people to share what's working well and what could be improved. Or it could involve implementing peer-to-peer feedback systems where colleagues can provide each other with regular informal input.
But feedback only works if people are receptive to it. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, developing emotional intelligence. And the ability to manage our reactions to feedback. Even when it's difficult to hear.
You've hit the nail on the head. Being able to receive feedback without becoming defensive or shutting down is a crucial skill for personal and professional growth. And it's something that can be learned in practice, just like any other skill.
So we've got open communication and regular feedback loops. What else can teams and organizations do to cultivate a culture of vulnerability and emotional intelligence?
Another powerful strategy is encouraging collaborative decision-making. Instead of decisions being made in isolation by a single leader or a small group, involve the people who will be impacted by those decisions. Tap into their expertise, their perspectives, and their ideas.
That makes sense, but isn't that a bit inefficient? I mean, does every decision require a team meeting?
Not necessarily. It's about finding the right balance between efficiency and inclusivity. For routine decisions, a streamlined process might be appropriate. But for decisions with broader implications involving a wider range of voices can lead to better outcomes, increased buy-in, and a stronger sense of ownership.
So it's about being strategic and intentional. About who to involve and when. And I imagine the Ripple Effect of Decisions article provides some good examples of what not to do in these situations.
Those real-world scenarios highlight the dangers of making decisions in a vacuum without considering the potential consequences for individuals and the team as a whole. They serve as cautionary tales for what can happen when vulnerability, empathy, and open communication are lacking in the decision-making process.
I'm thinking back to that example of the project manager who made a last-minute scope change without consulting the team. It seemed like a classic case of someone prioritizing their own agenda over the well-being of the team.
And it's likely that decision had ripple effects far beyond just the immediate project.
Right.
It probably eroded trust, increased stress levels, and ultimately impacted the team's overall performance.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even seemingly small decisions
Right.
can have a significant impact on the emotional landscape of a team.
So how do we avoid falling into those traps? Are there specific tools or frameworks that can help teams make more mindful and collaborative decisions?
Absolutely. The Professional Thoughts on Prioritization of Workload article introduces some useful frameworks that can be adapted for this purpose. Take the Eisenhower matrix, for example.
Okay.
It's a simple but effective tool for prioritizing tasks based on their urgency and importance.
I've heard of that when you categorize tasks into 4 quadrants.
Right.
Urgent and important. Important but not urgent. Urgent but not important. And neither urgent nor important.
Exactly.
But how does that relate to emotional intelligence and decision-making?
Well, imagine you're facing a situation where you're feeling overwhelmed at work.
Okay.
You're tempted to just dive into the most urgent tasks, but by using the Eisenhower matrix, you can step back and assess which tasks are truly important, not just urgent, and which ones can be delegated or even eliminated altogether.
Right.
This allows you to focus your energy on what matters most.
Right.
And to avoid burnout, it's about making conscious strategic choices rather than reacting impulsively.
So it's a way to prioritize not just tasks, but also your own emotional well-being.
Exactly. And you can apply this same principle to decision-making.
Okay.
Before making a decision, take some time to reflect on your emotional state.
Okay.
Are you feeling stressed, anxious, overwhelmed?
Right.
If so, acknowledge those feelings and consider how they might be influencing your decision. Then apply a framework like the Eisenhower matrix to assess the urgency and importance of the decision. This can help you make a more balanced and informed choice.
This is making me realize how interconnected all of these concepts are.
It is.
Emotional intelligence, vulnerability, decision-making, team dynamics.
Yes.
It's not about mastering one skill in isolation,
Right.
but rather about cultivating a holistic approach to how we work and interact with each other.
You've summed it up perfectly. It's about creating a culture where vulnerability is seen as a strength, emotional intelligence is valued, open communication is encouraged, and decisions are made collaboratively.
Right.
It's not a quick fix, but rather an ongoing process of learning, adapting, and evolving.
Sure.
But the rewards for individuals, for teams, and for organizations are well worth the effort.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. Thank you for sharing your expertise and insights with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And for our listeners who want to explore these topics further, I highly recommend checking out the articles we've discussed on LearnXYZ-In. You'll find a wealth of information and resources to help you on your journey. And for those of you watching on the LearnXYZ channel, don't forget to like this video.
Thanks for watching.
And subscribe for more insightful deep dives like this one.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time.
Oh.
Also, be sure to check out the fantastic website, www.learnxyz.ngl. Thank you for listening to the